Hello. Today we'll be exploring data from Arlington County's Department of Transportation. We'll be visualizing bike and pedestrian data captured on trails throughout this county in Northern Virginia. The data we'll be exploring is from July of 2012. As you can see from this macro view, we're visualizing the data over the location where it was actually captured. Data is captured in 15-minute intervals. We've displayed it from July 1st at the bottom through July 31st at the top. As we get closer in on the data, you'll start to discern certain shapes, sizes, and colors. Circles that you can see here represent bicyclists. Squares, which you can see more prominently in the distance, represent pedestrians that pass through that particular location. For purposes of scale, bigger and red is more, smaller and blue is less. I'll pan back out so we can again get the macro view and start to identify patterns and trends in the data. By visualizing in this manner, you're able to look at a significant amount of data in a single view. One of the things that you can quickly discern is which trails and paths have more volume than others. Here by National Airport, in the distance by Key Bridge, you see much more red than you do at other locations, indicative of these parts on the path getting used more than other parts. Other trends that start to emerge in the data, in particularly pronounced here by National Airport, is the higher volume in the latter two-thirds of the month than at the beginning. As we get in on that data, we can see this more prominently. In doing some external research, what we found was weather in July of 2012, during the first 9 days of the month, the average temperature, high temperature, was in the mid to upper 90s. And for the latter two-thirds of the month, the temperature was generally more moderate, high temperatures more moderate, in the mid to upper 80s. With the exception of July 17th to 20th, where again we were back in the mid to upper 90s, and you can see that the volumes on the trail were depressed at that point in time. Weather obviously being a big determinant factor of people using the trail. As we get closer in on the data, you can start to discern other patterns and trends as well. You may be familiar with the typical bimodal pattern of usage during weekdays. We can see that here where we've got significant activity in the morning, less activity throughout the day, and then more activity as commuters come home. Contrast that with a weekend day where we see a more unimodal, even pattern of usage all throughout the day. One of the other patterns and anomalies that pops out from the data is over in East Falls Church. I'll pan back out on the data to see if we can see that trend. And over here we can see that. We've got two very large circles, indicative of a volume of bikers. But interestingly, we don't see much traffic before, and we don't see much traffic after. So it begs the question, why? What's going on here at this point in the trail? Very likely it's an anomaly in the data. And as we look at that data, what we find is the data is indicating on July 11th at midnight, 374 bikers passed through that location. Well, again, with very little volume before, very little volume after, likely an anomaly in the data, potentially reflective of maintenance that may need to be performed on the device. But again, by visualizing it, we can quickly spot and identify that anomaly. What I'd like to do now is transition to similar data, but for a smaller period. Right now we're looking at 1 week's time, from June 29th at the bottom through July 6th at the top. Again, we see an anomaly over here in East Falls Church. And as we navigate in on that data, what we find is this data is from June 29th, 2012 at 11:30 at night, 204 bikers. Well, again, very little volume before, very little volume after, so very likely something wrong with the counter. In doing some research, what we found was June 29th was the day that the derecho weather event passed through DC at roughly this time. So this data, coupled with the data from July, indicative of possible need for maintenance or weather protection for that device. Now, by looking at 1 week's data, we can also spot additional trends and patterns. In the distance here, we can see the area around Key Bridge. And what we see is continued low usage for the first part of the week, with a very significant spike on one particular day. Well, as we recall, weather at the beginning of July of 2012 was very hot, so it begs the question, what was going on later in the week that would drive such an increase? Well, as we navigate to that data, we can ask the question why. We can find out very quickly that this was July 4th, and so what we see is throughout the day, pedestrians and bicyclists were using the path quite irregularly, capped by fireworks in the evening as volumes increased. By visualizing data in this manner, we can quickly spot patterns, trends, and anomalies, ask the question why, and quickly get to the answers that help us make better and more informed decisions. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video and learn more about bike and pedestrian data provided by Arlington County's Department of Transportation.